Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into an ancient text that completely flips our modern understanding of freedom upside down. We're challenging everything we think we know about rules, autonomy, and what it actually means to be free.
Now, think about that for a second. We're going to explore Dr. David Bauer's fascinating analysis of James chapter 2, and we're starting with this incredibly counterintuitive paradox. Can a strict, unyielding law actually be the exact thing that gives you true liberty?
Section 1. The royal law, the center of the kingdom.
Okay, let's jump right in. The entire foundation of this argument rests on a specific legal framework, summed up by a famous phrase you've definitely heard before: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But what Bauer's analysis points out is that James doesn't just treat this as good advice. He identifies it as the royal law. According to Jesus, this single command sits at the very center of all divine law. It's the ultimate metric for human behavior.
So why royal? Well, it's royal because it literally belongs to a king and a kingdom. It represents how Jesus, as king, took the ancient commandments of the Old Testament Torah and gave them a totally new, liberating ethical structure, specifically by putting this love command right smack in the center.
And how does this actually play out in practice? Well, under this royal law, absolutely all other commandments are subordinate to love. Every other rule, whether it's an ancient law about paying a worker their fair wages or just how you treat someone in your neighborhood, it's really just a specific expression of this primary call to love. It fundamentally elevates neighborly love way above anyone's personal status or wealth.
Section 2. The sin of partiality. Why favoritism fails.
According to Bauer, the ultimate violation of this law happens through partiality, or favoritism. And listen, this isn't just a minor slip-up or some slight social faux pas. It's a full-blown chain reaction. When you show favoritism, say, treating a wealthy person better than someone who's poor, you're prioritizing your own self-interest and status over doing good to your neighbor. You're elevating self-love above neighbor love, and by doing that, you willfully rebel against the lawgiver, becoming a transgressor of the whole shebang.
The text actually makes a stark claim here. James argues that whoever keeps the entire law but fails in just one single point, like showing partiality, is guilty of breaking all of it. Just one?
Now you might be wondering, why is that? It's because, within this theological framework, God is one. His law is perfectly united because it reflects his unified character. It's kind of like a giant iceberg. Your specific action, like dismissing someone in need, is just the tip visible above the water. But underneath, that single act is a complete rejection of the unbroken unity of God's character. You're not just breaking a rule, you're rebelling against the very nature of the lawgiver himself.
Section 3. James versus Paul. Two views on the law.
This builds a really fascinating theological tension between two major biblical figures, the Apostle Paul and James. If you know these texts, you know they can sometimes sound like they're having two completely different conversations. Side by side, the contrast is striking. Paul often speaks of the law with a negative function, calling it a schoolmaster or a tutor. To him, it's something that keeps us in bondage, specifically designed to show us our own moral impotence. James, on the flip side, describes the law in this highly positive light. He sees it as a fulfilling, liberating reality for a believer, made possible through faith.
But, and this is absolutely crucial, the analysis points out that despite this difference in emphasis, they don't actually contradict each other. Ultimately, they land on the exact same truth. I mean, Paul himself writes in his letter to the Galatians that the whole law is summed up in a single word: loving your neighbor as yourself. They both agree the law remains the ultimate index for how to live, but only, and this is a big only, when it's interpreted with love at its very core.
Section 4. The paradox of liberty. Internal versus external bondage.
Which brings us right back to our opening question. How on earth can a law liberate you? To get this, we have to look at two clashing worldviews on freedom. Now, our modern assumption is that human beings are inherently naturally free. We think of ourselves as autonomous selves who are only restricted when external laws or societal constraints are slapped onto us. But James presents a totally different reality. He argues that we are absolutely not inherently free. We are actually existentially bound from the inside out, and we desperately need God's law to free us.
So what's actually restricting us? Well, the text points to our internal passions. Ancient thought sometimes calls this the Yetzer. It's our own obsession with ourselves. We think we're making free choices, but let's be honest, Often we're just slaves to our own shifting desires, like mindlessly scrolling social media at 2 a.m. when we supposedly chose to go to sleep. Ironically, in our modern quest for absolute self-determination, we actually end up losing our freedom to self-obsession.
Because of this, the text argues that submitting to the royal law, that command to love your neighbor as yourself, doesn't restrict your freedom at all. It actively liberates you from the exhausting bondage of the self. By following this outward-focused law of love, you become more and more free to choose life, wholeness, and true community, instead of just being a prisoner to your own internal passions.
Section 5. Mercy triumphs over judgment, the final outcome.
All right, here is where the rubber really meets the road. If we're judged by this strict, all-encompassing law of liberty, where failing in one point makes us guilty of all of it, well, we have a major problem. Because, as James freely admits a little later in chapter 3, we all make many mistakes. None of us perfectly keep the royal law. None of us perfectly love our neighbor as ourselves all the time. If God's universe operated solely on a strict, unyielding justice, every single one of us would be left completely condemned.
Dr. Bauer explains this dilemma by looking at what he calls the two inclinations of God. On one hand, you've got justice, and justice is absolutely necessary. It holds us accountable. Without it, you just have total anarchy. More importantly, justice treats people as true, responsible persons rather than just mindless automatons. But on the other side, you have mercy and compassion. And within this theology, mercy is presented as God's ultimate, defining characteristic. The analysis suggests that God's love actually requires accountability so we aren't depersonalized. I mean, if your choices didn't matter, you wouldn't truly be human, right? But his justice is specifically designed to make way for his compassion. True justice is actually a dimension of ultimate mercy, because true love demands that we are held accountable for how we treat each other.
Which leads us to this incredible climax in the text. Mercy triumphs over judgment. The analysis shows that if you extend mercy to others, especially doing the tangible work of showing mercy to the poor and marginalized, and actively rejecting that sin of partiality we talked about earlier, you will, in turn, receive mercy. Your active compassion effectively triumphs over the strict judgment of the law.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, practical thought. We've seen that you are freed by the royal law not to serve yourself, but to love completely. And since true love demands accountability, but mercy ultimately triumphs, how are you going to take that freedom and use it to show mercy today? Thanks for exploring with us.